Let's go. Okay, welcome everyone to the Spirit Pathways podcast. I have Fiorenza Scholey with me, and we're going to have a conversation around all sorts of different things, particularly the things that Spirit Pathways offers as a support to those who are in need of guidance, inspiration, insight, clarity, all sorts of different things that we offer on our platform. So, hi Fiorenza, good to see you
Kate.
always.
Lovely to see you. And last podcast we talked about the energy work. We talked about all the magical things that you do with the energy and how fundamental that is as a base for everything. And in fact, you made a very good point that if you don't get rid of the energy, if you don't clear energies, all the rest it's a little bit like putting moisturizer on a face that hasn't been scrubbed. It only goes so far. So that's the base. But then the other things we do are the coaching, we do hypnosis, we do meditation, we do, what else do we do?
Well, we've got our courses with specifically Pathways to Mastery, which you are a facilitator of.
Yeah, the transformational journey over what ends up being almost a year. Really, it's a 44-week transformational journey, and it really is a transformational journey. Which is your masterpiece. I think I can say that, having been through it and now being a facilitator, it is really a masterpiece.
It feels like it was my thesis.
But it's amazing, because it's the beautiful thing about that course is that it is it's a journey into yourself, a guided journey into yourself. And what I have found is that it is everybody does it differently. Everybody has a different experience. Everybody gets from it what they need to get from it. Some will, because it's a 44 week, 44 module course, the way it works is that, each week you get a module and you go into it, and some of us will know certain areas of it. It will be familiar, so one can sort of glide through those and refresh. And then you'll come across something which is completely unexplored for you, which is a language you don't speak, which is an access that you've never even considered, and you guide us through that. The course guides you to get to those places that you haven't been before, in ways that you haven't been there before. And it's interesting because one of the most interesting parts of the journey is that you're never quite sure what's coming next. You don't need to know what the process is. You just need to trust the process. Exactly. And I remember when I did it with you, and I would say, but I don't understand this. And you would explain that moment, that particular module, and you would say, you don't need to understand. You will understand later. And in fact, that's a little bit like it's a bit like with children. When you explain to kids why things are the way they are, and they don't understand because they don't have the big picture, and you say, you just got to trust me, you just got to get this piece, and then it'll all become clear. And it's a bit like that, because it is a transformational journey. You come out the other end with an understanding of yourself and your place in the world, and the tools to approach that, which you don't have before. So it's a wonderful, wonderful course.
I also think I think we're so conditioned to know what the end point looks like. We're so conditioned to know, or to hope to know what it is that we're doing and why we're doing it. And actually, life isn't like that. We cannot predict how life will unfold. I mean, it doesn't matter how many psychics you see, or how many readings you have, or how much insight you can get about your future. How it unfolds can never ever really be shown to you, because it is a journey that you need to experience, and then a journey that you need to just go on. And I do often, there've been people on the course who have struggled with that, because they want to know, what is the purpose, what is the point, where am I getting to, what am I going to get out of this, what is the outcome? And it's difficult to put those outcomes into any kind of sentence, really, because for every single person the outcome is completely different, because what you get out of the journey, what you need, versus you will learn this, or you will learn how to do that, you will learn about yourself. And the beautiful part of it is it's a never-ending journey, because once you've completed it, you just step straight back into it and you start again, and you just go deeper and deeper and deeper into the levels of yourself. You know, and that is what life is. We do just continue to move into a deeper understanding of ourselves, into a deeper place of healing of ourselves, into a deeper place of awareness of ourselves. And that's the purpose of life. The more we do that, the more comfortable we become with the unknown, the more comfortable we become with who we are and our place in the world, the more comfortable we become with the past and everything that happened, and the more comfortable we become with not knowing the future. And we do just step into that beautiful space of just allowing everything to unfold exactly as it's meant to be. Yeah, so it's certainly something that I'm incredibly passionate about, and so excited when everyone starts their journey, because it's certainly, for me, I observe people transforming in front of my eyes. And one of the things I've always encouraged, as you know, is for everyone to journal their way through the process, because I do say, go back to the beginning, go back to your journals, go and look at what you were thinking, go and look at what you were grappling with, and see how far you've come. Because we don't often do that. We don't often have the opportunity to reflect on the journey and how far we've come, and the understandings that we've gained through the challenges that we've faced.
Well, I think that also one of the key words that you've used is awareness. I mean, it gives us, you know, that awareness and the ability to surrender control, because you're right, we're so used to holding on and moving through our lives in a way that we know the outcome. We know we act in such a way that we know what the outcome will be. And we can't grow that way, because the growth it occurs outside the control. And the journaling, I mean, to touch on the journaling, I think is a fundamental aspect, because many people do journal, but I think the importance of journaling in our lives is not necessarily that understood because journaling isn't just about writing about it for ourselves. It's about allowing a free flow of thought and of non-thought. I mean, it's really about, in fact, you know, I tend to encourage people when they're journaling, because, you know, when it's very easy to take a pen and write and think and write as if it is going to be read by somebody. Yes. That's not journaling. That's not journaling. Journaling is allowing whatever comes into your mind. It doesn't have to be good English. It doesn't have to be, you know, exciting content. It doesn't have to be, the idea is not for it to ever be read by anybody, and not even you if you don't want to. It is just a way of transforming your thoughts to paper, and in that process something happens, something shifts. And I think often when one allows oneself and just trusts, so I'm going to write whatever comes into my head, that we then reread it immediately after writing it, and it's like, wow, where did that come from? I had no idea that's how I really felt. And in fact, journaling can be very interesting exercise, which I sometimes do in my, you know, with clients of mine, is that I will ask them a question and I'll say, write down right now what the first thing that comes to your head. And once they let it go, you know, they answer things which they didn't even want to admit that they thought, because it's too hard to look at. And that's what I think the journaling is it's so important. It's so important.
And I think also, I mean, one of the things that I've noticed is so vital in the Pathways to Mastery course is that the people who engage in it in that way, you know, we're here as human beings to have this human experience, but part of that human experience is the healing and the growth and the evolution of our soul, our spirit, whatever you want to term it. And that can be daunting, because what does that even mean? You know, what does it mean to heal? What does it mean to grow? What does it mean to evolve? And we can get stuck in the details of how do I do that? Or we can hop from one thing to the next thing to the next thing, trying all these different things, reading all these different books. But how do we apply that in our lives? How do we bring that knowledge and apply it in our day-to-day lives? And what I found with the course is that what we do is it's structured in a way that you are given the opportunity to explore every aspect of yourself in a very structured and held space. Mm-hmm. But through that structured and held space, rather than tapping into the knowledge that you have gained from external sources, you start tapping into the wisdom that you carry through your soul, through your life experiences, and bring that out, which can be so incredibly profound and helpful moving forward, because then you do face things that perhaps you haven't known are sitting there, or things that have been difficult to admit, or you're ashamed of, or you don't know how to change, so you don't really want to go there. But through this process, you're given that opportunity to really look at things and decide on the changes that you need to make and the transformation that needs to come about.
Yeah, which is because it is about knowing yourself. It is that the course is about really knowing who you are. And most of us think we know who we are until we really start digging. We look in the bits that we want to look at, and we shut the door on the bits we don't want to look at, not because necessarily they're bad, just because maybe they're scary, because maybe we have maybe we're not living according to our values. Maybe we're not fulfilling our dreams. Maybe we have dreams that we put in a cupboard that we don't think that we deserve, or we don't think we can achieve, and we've accepted that that's not going to be part of our life. And by actually really digging and getting to know who we are, we have to take them out and look at them. And then we have to realize, well, actually, you can have your dream, but you have to have the courage to pursue it. And that
to make it happen.
Exactly. You have to make the changes necessary in your life to bring that about. And that can be very daunting, because, all change has a consequence. Because we don't live as islands. So as we change, the people around us are affected by those changes. And that's one of the hardest parts. That's one of the reasons why people resist change. It's not only how difficult it is within oneself to change, it's the consequences of our change. And it's the fact that we get reactions from the people around us. And if we change, it means that people's perception of us changes. It means that our relationship to people changes. It means that people's expectations are often disappointed, and we have to take that on. And that, that's why it's the domino effect that is it is so challenging for people to overcome.
And I think that's also where the facilitation is so important, that you don't do this course on your own, that there is someone with you through the journey. Mm-hmm. Because when you get to that point of panic or fear or crisis, there's someone who can hold you through that and get you through it and onto the other side, because on the other side are often the answers that you need. And one of the things that I do quietly chuckle about is that a lot of people suddenly realize things about themselves, or things or choices that they've made in their lives, and they say, right, that's it, I'm not doing that anymore. And they are now about to launch themselves into making all these massive changes in their lives. And I have to say, just hang on, get to the end of the journey before you implement a lot of those changes, because you're just dealing with one aspect of yourself, whether that's the emotional aspect or the physical aspect or the mental aspect, but there's wisdom to be gained in other parts. And when you bring those other parts together, then the change looks different. I have had people who want to leave their marriages as a result of starting the course, and I've got to say, hang on, just wait. That might not be at the end, that may not be the thing that you decide to do, because you recognize, in fact, there's a one person's coming to mind, and at the beginning of the course, when she started, she said, that's it, I can't do this marriage anymore, I'm out. And by the time we got to the end of the course, she recognized the part that she had played in the collapse of her marriage. And she was able to have a very honest and open conversation with her husband, where they were able to talk honestly for the first time in probably 20 years. And they were able to unpack things, and instead of blaming each other, take responsibility for them, and then decide what they were going to do to make the changes needed to continue their marriage rather than bail, which I just thought was so incredibly powerful, because she launched in there going, I'm out, and came full circle to actually, we can make this work. And not for any other reason than recognizing that there was still value in this relationship, and there was still love in this relationship, which was really beautiful.
Well, because she was reacting to the realization that it was that she was living something, not necessarily not a lie, but she was living a situation which was untenable.
Yeah.
Yeah,
living a part that wasn't actually fully her, because she perceived that this is what her husband wanted or needed, and actually that happens.
So that was her reaction. So, and I think a lot of people, one has a tendency to do that, is that we see that, you have a moment of clarity, and it's like, that's it, I'm going to react. And that's where we come from, a place of reaction and not response. It's reaction. And so rather than then see, as you say, where she was responsible for that, and how then the changes in her enabled her to communicate with her husband in such a way that they could then bring it together.
Exactly.
Which is the real transformation.
Yeah.
It's not about turning your life upside down necessarily. It's about turning yourself, coming at things from a different perspective, and being able to relate to them differently. And as a result, and we all know that the moment you relate differently, the moment you change, everything around you changes. You don't have to come in with a wrecking ball.
Exactly. And I think that's what people get so frightened of when they hear the words transformational change, is that because they do think, oh my God, everything is going to be thrown out, and I'm going to be left in this space with nothing that is familiar. And that's not necessarily the truth. A lot of the transformation is removing the layers that block who we truly are, or the expression of ourselves in the world, and finding a way to be comfortable with ourselves, because there's so much self-criticism and self-judgment and shame around who we are truly, that because we've listened to the external, we've been told this is who we need to be, this is how we need to behave, these are the life choices that are important, and then they may not truly be that for us, but we haven't been given the opportunity to explore, actually, who am I, and does this meet me, and does this match who I am? And if it doesn't, what are the subtle changes that I can make so that it does? And sometimes it's just a realization of, this is my perception. If I change my perception, everything changes. But nothing tangible changes. It's just your perception. Suddenly you see things in a different way. You see the world in a different way. And it's really, it can be as simple as that.
I think it is as simple as that. It is as simple as the fact that it comes, what we lose sight of is that it all comes from us. We can only be ourselves. We can only live our life it's all from here. And often we we simply react. We react to everything around us and the situations around us, and we're at the mercy of what is going on around us. And so we feel that our life is not coming from us, that our life is made up of a series of different people, different situations, and that is what our life is. But it's not. It's actually all coming from here. And if we can bring it all back into here, into ourselves, and understand that we are responsible, we can only be responsible for what we put out, but what we put out is what we will get back.
Exactly.
And it may not necessarily be what we expect, and it may not necessarily be what we want, but we can only be responsible for our place in the world. So if I know that I want to live in a certain way, and I want to live according to my values, my goals, my dreams, and there are certain things, certain values that I choose to live by, as long as I am secure in managing my side of the street and in what I put across, then the rest is really, it's beyond my control. I think that's also what people have a lot of difficulty with, is that you have to let go of what, you can't control the response. You can only come from a place of truth and of integrity, and that's where self-knowledge is important. Because if you're sure about your own boundaries, and you're sure about what is important to you, and you're sure about how you want to show up in the world, that's all you need to do. That's all. You just need to put one foot in front of the other and go into the world from that place, and the rest will come. Things that enrich your life will come. The people that are negative in your life will go away, because that's all part of how you show up in the world. It's about creating your boundaries. It's about being clear in your communication, which one can do from a place of peace and of stillness. It doesn't have to be a reaction. It can be from a place of stillness, and that other person will have their own reaction. If they don't like it, they'll go away.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's very subtle. It's very subtle, and it's definitely worthy of a bigger platform or a longer conversation. But because it is so subtle, because it's very simple, but it's quite hard to implement, because we do get so caught up in the emotions, and because our sense of self is often so tied to other people's validation, we get tied up and knotted up in what other people, we often give them what they want, which isn't necessarily what we want. If you look at within a marriage, often one is trying to be something because somewhere along the line we were told, or we acquired the belief from somewhere that we are supposed to be in a certain way in order to make someone happy, that we are supposed to do ABC, that this is supposed to be our role, whatever that may be. And we learn it so early on that we believe it's our own belief, whereas actually it's not. So often we're living a completely non-authentic reality in the belief that is what we want, until we detach ourselves from the fear of disappointing the other person.
Well, it's interesting, because I actually had a conversation this week with a 7-year-old who told me that she's having a really tough time at school, and she finds it really difficult to say no. So when she doesn't want to do something that her friends want to do, she struggles to tell them that she doesn't want to do it, or to say no. And I said, well, why are you struggling to say no? And she said, well, I don't want to hurt their feelings. And I said, okay, so why do you think that it is your job to make everyone happy? And she said, yes. So I was a little horrified at that response, because of course it's not our responsibility to make anyone happy. It is everyone. It is each our individual responsibility to make ourselves happy. And what I realized in talking to her is that a lot of the information that is fed to kids, and obviously we've been fed this as well as adults, is this need to make sure that everyone's okay, to make sure that everyone's happy, to always be focusing on the positive, when life isn't actually like that. You know, we have challenges. And if we look at it from a soul perspective, we're all here living out karma. There's going to be things that we don't like, people that we don't like, people that we have conflict with. It's part of the journey. It's supposed to be part of our growth. And, you know, so one of the things that I kind of unpacked with this child was, there's a way of being able to say, sorry, let me take it a step back. I said to her, what is the problem with saying no? And she said, it's unkind. So I said, okay, so let's find a way to say no while being kind, because we don't have to be nasty to say no. We don't have to be nasty when we put a boundary in place. Of course, I didn't use that word with her. But, and she said, well, how do you say no without being horrible? And I said, well, you say no, thank you. It's as simple as that. You add the thank you, that's the kindness. The no is the firm boundary. Mm-hmm. And anyway, I'll have a conversation with her at another point and ask her how that's going. But it was just fascinating to see how influenced she was by this belief and this perception that we are here to make others happy when we're not.
Well, but also because we're not taught, I mean, certainly our generation was not taught about the importance of our own boundaries. We're taught, and even today, we're taught, kids, you see in the playground and in schools and in playgroups, parents and caregivers are teaching kids about other people's boundaries. They're saying, you know, that whole concept of space, but they're not teaching kids from the very beginning what a boundary feels like, what it's there for. And boundaries are energetic. I mean, that's, you know, and we're not taught that either, because everybody's boundaries are different. And people, so if we can teach children that you know, first of all, if something feels uncomfortable, that's a sign of a boundary. You know, it's a little bit like if someone comes too close and they stand on your toes, that's a very tangible example of coming too close, right? It hurts me because you stood on my toes. But if somebody, you know, we take the example of saying no, if you it's all about communication. It's all about, you know, being able to say, okay, why am I saying no? And explaining, saying, you know, I'm afraid I don't want to do that because da, 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 da. Because people respond to understanding. If they understand, no feelings aren't going to be hurt. Somebody might be disappointed because they wanted, in the case of a child, I want to go and play with my friend doesn't want to come and play with me, but there's a reason. And, you know, it's never, I don't want to play with you because I don't like you. It may be, I don't want to play with you because when I play with you, you're mean to me. And that makes me feel sad. And even then, you've just changed the conversation. Just changed. At that point, you're putting the responsibility on the other person, and they understand what it is, why it is you're saying no.
Exactly.
Because hurt feelings usually come from not understanding. Because you have, you know, your feelings are hurt because you have no way of responding and no way of fixing it because you don't understand. Whereas if you give someone the information, then they have a chance to either, you know, remedy it, or at least to have a conversation or to understand.
And then from that understanding, be able to make a different choice. You know,
Exactly.
they can choose, oh, well, okay, well, I'm not going to be mean to you anymore. And I'm sorry, I didn't know, you know, I didn't realize I was. I mean, I think it's also the need for understanding. And this is where communication is so vital. Because I think in a lot of relationships, there's not enough communication. You know, we expect the other people to know what's going on in our head via osmosis or something, because we don't we don't talk about why we're feeling the way that we're feeling, or why we're reacting the way that we're reacting. And I've always been aware of in my own life of having grown up with an abusive mother. You know, a lot of my reactions to challenge or to difficulties or to stress were not necessarily good reactions, in the sense that I get to a point where there was just this explosion of stuff, because I'd held it all together for so long, and you know, there comes that breaking point where you can't. And I remember being very conscious with my children of always going to them and explaining and apologizing, you know, and explaining why I exploded, explaining why I reacted the way that I did, so that they understood that actually it had nothing to do with them, that it was my stuff. And it was incredible, much later on, when I think my eldest daughter was about 16, and I remember I can't remember what I was going through, but it wasn't a very good time, and I wasn't feeling good about myself, and I was feeling challenged by a lot of the different things. And when I go into that space, I do kind of feel like the world's against me, and I do feel like I'm all alone, and I feel like no one understands, and I've always got to fix it, and I've always got to make it right. And it's a horrible space to go in, and a very isolated space. And I remember my daughter, who was only 16 at the time, walked up to me, grabbed me by the shoulders, said, "Mom, look at me. I love you. You are not alone. You are not doing this alone. We are here. We will help you. Just tell us what you need." And that snapped me right out of that space. And I don't know if I ever went back there. But I sat her down and I said, you know, explain to me how did you get to that place? And she said, well, you've been telling me my whole life why you react the way that you react. And she said, I realized you'd gone back into that horrible space and you needed to be snapped out of it. So I just snapped you out of it. And you know, that can be the power of just communicating.
Absolutely.
What is happening and what's going on inside.
But I mean, absolutely. And by communicating to our kids from a very young age, they absorb the knowledge, they get the knowledge, and they understand. Then they see us in our true light, and they also see where we end and they begin, right? Okay. And we give them, so you know, she responded like that because you've taught her. That's how you've taught her, which means she can see when it's not about her.
Yes, exactly.
She can see when it's not about her, and she's able to then put you in front of it and say, this isn't about it. Empowers her to have a voice. She doesn't just have to hide because mum's, you know, on a rampage because she's upset, you know, about all sorts of other things, which is what happens to me. I had a similar experience with my own daughter, who, you know, who's 15, and I was getting all upset, and I snapped at her, and she just looked at me and she said, okay, Mum, we know that you're not upset because of what I've done. So what is it? What's going on? And it was rather like you. It's like, oh my God. And, you know, and also because of our ways of mothering at this point, because of where we've come from ourselves, we have the humility to be vulnerable in front of our children, which is also an incredibly, incredibly important thing. Because if we don't show them that we're vulnerable, how are they going to learn to be vulnerable? Exactly. How are they going to do that? So we have to show our weakness. We have to show our humility. We have to say we're sorry. We have to, you know, and they teach us because we have taught them. And so as we have taught them, they in turn can teach us. And that's the way it's supposed to be. And that also smashes completely this idea of the fact that the parents are supposed to be always in the right. And that goes on, you know, in certain situations, certainly the older generations, and even the younger ones, you know, there's still this idea that the parent is the authority. Come what may, doesn't matter if they're wrong, they're the authority. You know, that whole that phrase that I'm sure you might have heard, of that many of us grew up with. How dare you talk to me like that?
Yes, heard that plenty.
And if you just think of what that, you know, that is that those words, if you actually just take those words for what they are, how can you have the courage to speak to me and to challenge my authority? You know, which you knock out a child in a, you know, unless you have already taught them to have the courage to stand up to you, which is doubtful if that's the way you brought them up.
Yeah, if those are the words that are coming at you, it's very doubtful that
Exactly.
you taught.
Whereas by giving them a voice, and because children know everything anyway. So if we can give them a voice of being able to tell us what they see, tell us what they feel, and know that we are prepared to listen to them, because they can observe us the way that we observe them. They don't have the knowledge that we have, they don't have the experience we have, but they certainly that you know, they start by building it, you know, with every year they're building their experience. And if we talk to them about their experiences in the same way we talk to each other, we can actually help their wisdom grow much faster. But we have to give them that space, which doesn't mean that there are no boundaries. It does not mean that there is no respect. It does not mean that you do not establish the fact that I am the parent, you are the child. There are going to be moments when what I say goes simply because I say it, because in that moment, I don't have the time, I don't have the space, and I'm not prepared to negotiate. But that's also a question of setting boundaries, setting the rules. There's a lot to unpack here.
There is so much. We could go on for hours and hours and hours.
So we won't bore everybody.
Particularly about these boundaries, the boundary issues. And I think that, you know, one of the things that both you and I do in our different in our individual sessions when we're working with clients is look at these very key things that have formed a lot of how we are in the world, and whether we have those boundaries or we don't have those boundaries, and to understand boundaries. You know, I think that there's a real misunderstanding about boundaries. Firstly, people don't understand that they start energetically and they start from within you. It's not something that you lay out in front of you and say, there's the wall, there's the barrier, this is the line, don't you dare cross it. We've got to understand, firstly, why we want to put those boundaries in place. You know, why do we want to draw that line? What is that? Because sometimes we can draw that line and it's not an appropriate line, but we're putting it there because there's a wounding within us that needs to be looked at. And you know, this is, I think that, you know, tying back to those sessions that where the coaching can be so helpful, is to unpack where do our boundaries lie? Do we even have any boundaries? What do boundaries feel like? What do they look like? How do I implement them? When do I know that I even need a boundary? I mean, these are things that I had to figure out in my life because I grew up with no boundaries. I mean, there just weren't any. And it can be hard to determine that, because as an adult, to determine what boundaries feel like when they've been broken over and over and over again. And I think that you brought up a key point there, is it's about feeling. You know, if there's an uncomfortable feeling, you know, a boundary is being crossed or a boundary is being pushed. But we need to be able to go into that space of reflecting on what is that uncomfortable feeling and why am I feeling uncomfortable and why is that boundary necessary? Because self-awareness is so key in navigating so many things, not just parenting, but relationships and work and finding the balance of all things in life. If we have no self-awareness, then we don't really understand it. We kind of just get flung from one thing to the next thing, from one crisis to the next crisis, trying to find our feet.
Yeah, no, the self-awareness part is extremely is fundamental. It's the fundamental basis, and it's often the thing that is the hardest to crack, because self-awareness also requires us to be honest with ourselves and to take a long, hard look in the mirror, and that, you know, that's where we touch on the fear of acknowledging our weaknesses, acknowledging our mistakes, acknowledging our responsibility, or our lack of taking responsibility. And so one of the first things is to get over that fear. is that understand that that's just part of being human. It's just part of being human, and it's okay it's okay to look at oneself and say, oh, that wasn't very nice. I mean, that's where the self-awareness comes in, is the ability to actually, rather than have someone, like your child say, Mum, that wasn't very nice, why are you doing that, to be able to do it to yourself and watch yourself as you interact in the world. And it's about being a conscious observer. You literally have to remove yourself and see yourself from slightly from behind yourself, and observe when you do things that are in line with your values and your code, and when they're not. And when they're not, why? What happened in that moment that made you go off, made you react, made you shut down? What triggered fear? What, or as far as boundaries are concerned, what is it that stops you putting up a boundary towards someone? What is it that you're afraid of, that you're prepared to let yourself be invaded? And it's all about, and as we look at that, and it is energetic, it's about getting in tune too with what it feels like, because it all comes with a feeling. I mean, when we respond, it's to feelings. And so if we can just get in tune with what that actually feels like, it's actually not very difficult. And that's where I use hypnosis quite a lot, because hypnosis helps with that too, because it's like the conscious mind is a curtain, and you just push that away, and then you can just focus on what's going on in the rest of you. And it makes you just a bit more sensitive to what's really going on, and you can hear it. And so, and these are all tools. It's just about a toolbox. It's really no more than that. It's about, we help people put together their toolbox, and then they have a toolbox with which they can go into the world. And when they have a flat tire, they get out and they have the right tool. If you don't have the jack to hoik up the car, you can't change the tire.
And I think it's also important, just to go back at, when we're unpacking all of these things, and when we're looking at ourselves and the choices that we have made, and perhaps the mistakes that we've made, and the things that we could have done differently, it's to do it from a place of compassion, not a place of judgment. Absolutely. And I think that's an incredibly important space to clarify, because I think that we're so hard on ourselves anyway. There's so much self-judgment that goes on. There's so much shaming, inner shaming that happens. And that's not the space that we want people to go into. We want people to go into the space of looking at themselves compassionately, because if we look back in our lives, at every point, at every choice, at every moment, we are doing the best that we can with the knowledge and the information that we have in that moment. We cannot do it differently. In hindsight, hindsight is always a beautiful thing. In hindsight, we can look back and we say, well, I had that option, I could have done it differently, and I could have done this. No, you couldn't, because you didn't have the information that you have now. You didn't have the insights that you have now. You didn't have the understanding of the consequences that you have now. Mm-hmm. So we've got to look back at ourselves compassionately and be able to say, well, I did the best that I could. Absolutely. Even if that base created more turmoil or crisis or difficulty or challenge for me, it was still the only thing that I knew to do in that moment.
Yeah, and I think that the compassionate side is fundamental. And if we think that when we look at ourselves, because we are so hard on ourselves, but if we learn to look at ourselves and what we have done and the mistakes we've made with the same compassion and in the same way as we would look at it if it was one of our closest friends. If it was one of our closest friends who came to us and said, I've done this and I've done that and I've done that, A and B and C, we would help them find a way to understand why they'd done it, to unwrap it, to forgive themselves, and to understand the aspects, and to be kind with themselves. But we don't offer that to ourselves. So we have to start learning to treat ourselves as if we were our best friend.
Exactly.
Which is it's so obvious, and yet none of us do it. None of us do it. The first thing we do is, God, I'm such an idiot. And I started an exercise with myself at a certain point where, because I talk to myself out loud, and I could hear myself berating myself. And one day I realized, would I say that to anyone else? Would I tell someone that they were completely stupid and what an idiot, and that they were looking hideous, and would I insult them the way I insult myself? And I learned that became an awareness point for me, is don't say anything to yourself that you wouldn't say to someone else. So now when it slips, and when I slip and I say, God, you were so stupid, I think, stop. You wouldn't say that to someone else. And it's amazing how slowly that changes the way in which you then look at yourself. Because if you're constantly telling yourself, giving yourself bad messages, you believe it. You're just compounding what you know, reinforcing what the negative beliefs, rather than. And it's not about being all sort of self-love. I love myself, aren't I beautiful? Aren't I marvelous? That's not
staring at yourself in the mirror.
I can't come to it from that place. But the self-love is about compassion. That is what is it about. It is about giving yourself the kindness that you would offer to someone else. That's what self-love is. It's got nothing to do with conceit or believing you're marvelous, and I think that's where that line of self-love gets misunderstood, because it's not, and especially for the Anglo-Saxons amongst us, it sort of goes against every grain we have. But the fact is that self-love is self-compassion, and it's self-kindness. And if we can just start with that, which will change the whole way because if we love ourselves, we're going to be kinder to other people.
Exactly. And I think it's also important to recognize that, in order to start this, to just become aware of the words that you use and how you speak, not even just to yourself, but to everyone else as well. I mean, one of the things that I always find fascinating is the words that people use in conversation. How many times do you sit at a dinner table and people say, "Oh, I'm starving." You're not starving. You're not starving. You may be hungry, but you're not starving. Or this is killing me. No, it's not killing you. It's,
Yeah.
And when we start to recognize all these terms that we use and actually how damaging they are on an unconscious level, we can start to recognize how we are not being compassionate with ourselves, and therefore not compassionate with others, or not being kind to ourselves and not being kind to others. And it is as simply as watching, observing how we speak, watching the words that are coming out of our mouths.
Yeah, because it's energy. It's all energy. It's all energy. And we absorb it and we take it on and we become.
Exactly. All right. Well, we've come to the end of our time together today. So thank you again for joining me. It's always so exciting because I never know where our conversation is going or what topics we're going to cover, which is wonderful. And it just means that it is raw and authentic and real. And that's what we want to be presenting.
Yeah, that's who we are. And that's how, we are the people we speak to.
Exactly. So I look forward to doing this soon with you again, and thank you to all those who have taken the time to listen. And we will chat soon.
Okay, take care.